New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr could still start Week 15 against the Washington Commanders, but he shouldn't. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to go over the things that we've learned since Darren Rizzi took over, going almost position by position, leading off with what we learned about the coaching staff and what could work for the New Orleans Saints next head coach. We got all that. We're also going to dive into a new face in the quarterback room and some of the decisions that the New Orleans Saints need to make at that position moving ahead here through the rest of the season. And we're going to kick everything off with Derek Carr, who interim head coach Darren Rizzi said could still start up against the Washington Commanders. I'm going to tell you why I think he shouldn't. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether you're catching us for your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to the Prize Picks app, and you can get started with $50 instantly by using that promo code LOCKEDONNFL and playing your first $5 lineup. New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr could technically still start up against the Washington Commanders. I think that's a little bit of gamesmanship by the New Orleans Saints and by interim head coach Darren Rizzi. But even if he could actually start on Sunday against the Commanders, I don't think that he should. Allow me to explain to you why, because I have a few reasons. And I will tell you right now, none of them have anything to do with being against Derek Carr playing football. Just to alleviate anybody that's concerned about that right now, this is simple for me. Returning too quickly from this injury could cause the New Orleans Saints a lot of grief, and it could cause Derek Carr even more grief as well. Listen to a couple of things here. The history so far, the New Orleans Saints over the course of their first 2 years with Derek Carr at the helm, their record following Derek Carr injuries, they're effectively 1-3 in his returning games from injury. Derek Carr was hurt week 3 at Green Bay, came back week 4. We were all very surprised. Came back week 4, loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Hurt against Minnesota week 10, came back. This is last year in 2023. Came back after the bye week against Atlanta, week 12, loss. Now here's where the fortune changed a little bit. Derek Carr was hurt against Detroit at home, concussion protocol, all these other things, week 13 of 2023. Came back against Carolina, won that game up against Carolina week 14. And just to be fair here, because some might say, well, that's Carolina. Well, the Saints would also go on to win 4 of their last 5 following his return off of that. So call that whatever you want. I'm going to call it one win in games coming off of a Derek Carr injury, though. But I acknowledge the 4 or 5 wins to close out the season there. Finally, Derek Carr this season hurt week 6 through 8, missed those games, came back against Carolina week 9, lost at Carolina. So the team that he came back and beat last year came back and lost to on the road this year. And not just he, the Saints, right? So that's the record of, or the history so far of the New Orleans Saints in games in which Derek Carr is returning from injury. Not great. And some of that isn't necessarily just that he came back from injury. Some of that is, did he come back from injury too quickly? And that could very well be a situation here to where he should miss a game or two, even if the hand is not broken, even if there is no actual fracture. And it is truly, just as interim head coach Darren Rizzi called it, a non-throwing hand injury. Give it some time. The risk of further injury is reason number 2, because things could get tricky if the injury gets worse. You might have gotten lucky on Sunday up against in that win up against the New York Giants, but there's no need to push that luck. And the Saints need to be concerned about this just as much as Derek Carr needs to be concerned about the re-injury situation. Here's why. You have this left hand fracture or left hand injury that could turn into a much worse injury if there is the risk of worsening, whatever the ailment actually ends up being. But if there is a risk to that, Do you risk the opportunity or the situation in which that injury could jeopardize Derek Carr's 2025 availability? Because here's the reality. Derek Carr is probably going to be the Saints quarterback in 2025 because they don't have the cap space to be able to just cut him and take the cap hit and all those other things. If they want to get under the salary cap, they effectively have to restructure his contract unless they can talk him into reworking his deal, which goes out the window if the injury is bad enough that it jeopardizes any of his 2025 offseason or regular season. Why? Because he has an injury guarantee that guarantees $30 million if he's not able to pass a physical. So do you run the risk of playing him this weekend or playing him too soon and then not having your quarterback that you need in 2025, but still having to pay him out $30 million? That could be worst case scenario. Now, it would take an absolutely dramatic injury, I imagine, to actually keep him out of 2025 or make it so that he's unavailable for the beginning of 2025. But why risk any of it? Because it's not just the hand that you're worried about. If he's concerned about the hand, maybe it takes his attention off of something else that creates some other big injury that could lead to X, Y, and Z, right? So there's the mental side of the injury game you have to be willing to deal with and making sure that you're taking into account in this situation and not just the physical of the left hand. So if you end up in a situation here to where you end up with a quarterback that gets dramatically hurt because you rushed him back or allowed him to come back too soon, it could end up costing you in 2025. Now, I think that the $30 million injury settlement, or not injury settlement, excuse me, but injury guarantee thing is something that's getting overblown a little bit, because I don't think that the Saints have a plan to not have him on the roster in 2025. It's just hard to see how they maneuver the cap in such a way that allows them to be able to do that when the NFL is preparing for like a $20 million cap increase going into 2025. They're not preparing for like this big leap in the salary cap like we surprisingly saw last offseason. Now, that's just a lot of speculation. We'll see exactly what ends up happening. I've been told multiple times from team sources that the Saints don't feel like because they restructured his contract last year or because of their salary cap situation that they're married to him. But there's the what you feel like, and then there's the actual realistic logistics, right? And then here's my last piece, because the evolution and evaluation of your young quarterbacks is dramatically important. In fact, I think it's too important because the New Orleans Saints still do not have a long-term answer at quarterback. Derek Carr is not your long-term answer at quarterback, 10 plus years kind of a thing. Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, odds are they're probably not your long-term answers either. Not against them, but just simply based upon where they were drafted and what the NFL typically does in terms of patience when it comes to players that are drafted at that position in that area of the NFL draft, which are those mid rounds. Those guys have every chip stacked against them. And because of that, some first rounder, some second rounder in the next 2 or 3 years is in fact more likely to become the Saints' long-term answer at quarterback or get the opportunity to do that than these two guys will. So give them the opportunity to prove you wrong before you get the opportunity to move on from them, and they can't prove you wrong. I think the evaluation of the young quarterbacks is too important right now. And so I think that that's another reason why the New Orleans Saints, just as much as Derek Carr, should be concerned about his long-term health. The Saints should be concerned about his long-term health and their ability to evaluate their long-term options at quarterback. We'll see which way the New Orleans Saints go. But Darren Rizzi did say that they will select a quarterback Tuesday afternoon. It is Tuesday afternoon. We're getting our show out. It's kind of an evening show today. But making that decision, that quarterback will get the majority of the reps Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But if Derek Carr is good to go on Sunday, that they are comfortable playing him even if he does not practice, which again feels like a little bit of gamesmanship, but we'll see which way the New Orleans Saints go. Coming up next, these quarterbacks that we've discussed, Jake Haener, Derek Carr, as well as Spencer Rattler, are not the only quarterbacks in the building anymore, but that doesn't mean that you should be looking at this person as a potential threat to the young QBs. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends at Ice Shaker. I absolutely love my Ice Shaker stainless steel workout bottle. No intense little wire ball inside to help break it up. Awesome technology built into this thing. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers. So if you're trying to get swole like the Gronkowskis when you're hanging out at the athletic club, boom, these workout bottles are awesome for you. Great for water as well when you're traveling. And now they have a licensing deal through the NFL, the NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, which means you can also get ice shakers that look like and are branded by your favorite teams as well. So you can always show your support when you're out at the gym getting swole. I absolutely love these workout bottles, some of my favorites. So go ahead and check them out. Grab one for yourself. You can order your team branded ice shaker at iceshaker.com and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's going to give you 25% off of your order. Ice shakers, show your support for your teams that you love with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shaker. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, if you love watching football, you're going to love it even more if you're also checking out Prize Picks, which is the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Helps you make every game matter. Super fun to watch as well. So whether it's football, basketball, whatever your favorite sport is, Prize Picks is even making the holidays bigger and better as well. Right now, you can win up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks. All you got to do is pick at least 2 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You get those right, you win up to 200 times your money. And right now, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pickmas by offering 2 free picks in December. So this is the time to get in over at Prize Picks. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $50 instantly after you win your first $5 lineup. Actually, you don't even have to win. You're just going to place your first $5 lineup and you're going to get $50 instantly when you use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL on the Prize Picks app. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints bringing in a new face at quarterback, adding to that quarterback room, but don't expect him to see the field. At least that's not what I would expect at this point. The New Orleans Saints are signing NFL veteran, 28-year-old quarterback Ben DiNucci. Yeah, the meme is alive and well. Ben DiNucci, of course, started 3 games back in 2020. During that time, didn't throw for any touchdowns or any interceptions, 219 passing yards, basically. Pretty easy, nice little couple of games that he had to come in and play. But then since then has kind of bounced around to a couple of other teams, Buffalo Bills, for instance, all that. But spent 2023 with the Seattle Sea Dragons over in the XFL. They led them to a 7-3 record, threw for over 2,600 yards, 20 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, led them to a postseason appearance. Unfortunately, they lost that postseason appearance, but he threw 3 touchdowns to no interceptions in that game. It was not on him that the Seattle Sea Dragons came up short there in their postseason life or postseason lifespan. But this gives the New Orleans Saints an opportunity to add another veteran to either the active roster or the practice squad. It'll be one of those two. We're not exactly sure just yet. But it was actually him who broke the news, which is pretty fitting for Ben DiNucci. He's a very fun guy. But he ended up actually tweeting himself saying that he was the source that he'll be signing with the Saints. That's a pretty solid source on that. I would expect the reason behind signing Ben DiNucci is twofold. Give you another veteran in practice, give you another guy to get some of the scout team reps while your guy that's usually leading one of the scout teams ends up taking starter snaps and stuff like that. So you kind of have to have that third quarterback that's going to be able to throw passes. Tells you that the Saints don't expect Derek Carr to be throwing passes early on in the season or early on in the week as well, I think. But the other thing is that it gives you an emergency third quarterback that has NFL experience, that has played the game, that can go out there and be able to execute your system for you if you need them to, or take some snaps, hand the ball off, whatever it might be in terms of how it is that they want to run it. But I don't think you're looking at Ben DiNucci coming in as being a guy that's going to be pitted against Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler to potentially come out and start for New Orleans if Derek Carr doesn't play this weekend. So I wouldn't expect that to be the reason that they brought him in. I think it's more just about having that veteran quarterback that can come in, that's been there before, that's done it, and that can go out there in an emergency situation and take some snaps for you and finish out a game in case you need that. So I would expect him to be inactive on game day, and then potentially the third quarterback, assuming that Derek Carr is also inactive on Sunday. Darren Rizzi said that the team will make their decision on who to prep to start today. Okay, so Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, we're going to get a pretty good indication of it once we get out on the field tomorrow on Wednesday for practice, once we see who's getting the most reps, assuming, of course, that news doesn't break before then and everything, which, in fact, I should probably check since I'm recording this late. and I want to make sure that I don't end up passing up on that. Okay, no, I did not pass up on that. So that's great. So we'll see when we get out there, unless it comes out earlier, which of those young quarterbacks ends up being. I kind of have to just phrase it as prepped to be the starter, right? Like, because there's still we have to keep we have to believe what they're saying and keep the possibility of Derek Carr playing available, right, as an option for New Orleans. Again, I'd be shocked if we saw that. And so I think what you would see is a young quarterback prepped all the way throughout the week, and then eventually that quarterback ends up being the guy that ends up starting this game. If it ends up being Jake Haener, which again makes sense if it is, because the Saints got 3 games with Spencer Rattler already. Maybe they want a few games of Jake Haener here. It makes sense. But if they go that way, just as a side note, that means that the New Orleans Saints will have had 8 starting quarterbacks since Drew Brees retired. 8 starting quarterbacks. That includes Jameis. That includes Trevor Siemian, Taysom Hill. That includes Andy Dalton, and then Spencer Rattler, and then now you go back to Ian Book for a game, like all that. And so Jake Haener would be the 8th quarterback to start since Drew Brees retired for the New Orleans Saints. So this is kind of what you expect when your Hall of Fame quarterback retires, right? Is that you have sort of this big collection of different quarterbacks that ends up starting until you finally find that next 10 plus year guy. But it takes time. They'll eventually find that player, but it definitely does take time. So here are the couple of things that the Saints are considering when it comes to which of the quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener, they're going to choose to get prepped to be the starter this weekend up against the Washington Commanders. It's not just about what they individually bring, though, of course, that is a large part of the conversation. But the offensive staff as a whole will be discussing this along with Coach Rizzi. And a couple of things. Who gives you a better chance to win versus the defense and the team that you're about to face, the scheme that you're going to be going up against, what the run game is going to look like, and the game plan that the Saints intend to execute against those teams. So those are going to be the things that you're looking for. Now, who the Saints pick as their, prepped to be starting quarterback for this weekend does not have to be the same as who they prep to be the starting quarterback in Green Bay, right? If Derek Carr can't go for that game either. So this is not a marriage once the Saints say, they plant their flag and they say, this is our starting quarterback for week 15. If it is one of those young guys, it doesn't necessarily lock them in to rolling with that same young guy for the rest of the season or for the rest of the games that Derek Carr might miss, right? So that's definitely something to keep an eye out on as well. So the QB is going to be chosen. They're going to get the majority of the reps throughout the week. But then keep in mind that even if Carr does not practice, the Saints will at least publicly keep open the option to start him this weekend. Here's why I say that might be some gamesmanship. I think that it's tough on any team to have to prepare for the quarterback that they're going up against, because you play 16 games, 3 of those games or 6 of those games are repeat opponents. So you got 3, you got 15 total, or not 15 total opponents, but 15 total opponents or whatever. And each of them has a different style quarterback. Each of them has a different quarterback. And so you're always having to prepare for a different quarterback week in, week out. That's already challenging. But to force a team to prepare for 3 different quarterbacks, if you can do that, that's why I think there could be some gamesmanship in all of this as well. Like, it could be that the reality is that Derek Carr's injury is not as bad as what was originally reported. However, he's still going to miss time, but they don't want anybody to know that. And so instead, you keep all the possibilities open, play a little bit of chess before your matchup begins on the field. So that could very well be the way that this is going. We'll see when all is said and done. But it sounds like we're going to get a pretty good glimpse at who is actually going to be that starting quarterback tomorrow when we get to practice on Wednesday. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints now have 4 games under Darren Rizzi, and we've learned a lot in these 4 games, including why a particular type of head coach could actually be a good decision by the New Orleans Saints. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and where you should go to make the most of the rest of this NFL season. FanDuel, not too favorable when it comes to the New Orleans Saints hosting the Washington Commanders in Rookie of the Year favorite Jaden Daniels out of the Saints right now, 7-point underdogs. There were 7.5-point underdogs that got bet down to 7. Maybe you feel good about that. Maybe you don't feel as good about that. Maybe you want to tease it up. You can do a whole bunch of stuff over at FanDuel. You even get in on like same game parlays and stuff like that. A ton that you can check out over there. And if you're a new customer, it's even better because right now new customers are going to get, if you put down $5, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets. If that $5 bet wins, you can head over to the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Check out the live betting options, live stats, play-by-play, all in the same place, and head to FanDuel.com to join it today. You're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets as a new customer when you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints now have 4 games down with Darren Rizzi as their interim head coach. And I think that we've learned a lot by looking at the young talent that they have and might have learned a lot about where the New Orleans Saints could go and their coaching staff as well. I think one of the big things that we've learned that's kind of overarching when it comes to the coaching staff is that landing with a leader, motivator, head coach, and then getting coordinators that know what they're doing could be a pretty good way to go if you're the New Orleans Saints. Now, I think that the Saints still have to cast a wide net. I think that the Saints still have to go after the big, bright offensive mind, like do all the things that are going to get you competitive in today's NFL. And those are ways to do that. But it's clear that having a Darren Rizzi type, a Dan Campbell type is not the worst scenario, far from, in fact, the worst scenario in the world at head coach. So it could be very interesting while we have all these conversations all the time with defensive head coach, offensive head coach, defensive head coach, offensive head coach, all that. Maybe really what the New Orleans Saints need over anything else is just simply new ideas, new vision, and new direction, which could work against Darren Rizzi. But remember, one of the big things that Darren Rizzi has done since he has been in that position at interim head coach is he's been changing a lot of stuff. So just something to keep in mind, that change has motivated and led this team. Having a motivator and leader at head coach has driven some buy-in for this roster. Having that type of head coach is not necessarily the offensive mind, not necessarily the defensive mind, clearly works. And especially for a team that's going to get progressively younger over the course of the next few seasons. And speaking of that, what about the things that we've learned about the New Orleans Saints roster? I think one of the big things we've learned about the roster is that they do have impressive young talent, but they definitely still have some holes to fill. And when they go to address those, they might be better served filling those holes with more young talent, not necessarily going the mixed roster of veteran and young player type or blend approach. I think you're going to have veteran players on your teams no matter what, right? Guys over the age of 30, all those other things. But you look at how many the New Orleans Saints have, which I believe is 9 players, if I remember correctly, and over $140 million of salary cap space, according to Catherine Terrell over at ESPN, allocated to players over the age of 30. That part's not great. But you do want to have some veterans around to, lead and do all those other things? Absolutely, sure. And so I think that while the Saints roster of the elder portion of the roster is kind of, you're going to see more and more of those guys leaving over the course of the next few years, adding more of the young talent to learn from those guys is a big transition thing that I think the New Orleans Saints should be looking to do. So let's take a look at a couple of positions. We mentioned quarterback, right? They have promise there in Jake Haener. They have promise there in Spencer Rattler, but we don't know if they have an answer long-term, and we don't know if either one of those guys is going to be given a real viable shot, depending upon who the new head coach is, what the new offense looks like, if there is a change at offensive coordinator, what ends up happening in the draft, all those other things. We don't even know if those guys are going to get a quote-unquote fair shake and a fair opportunity to prove that they can be the long-term option. So that's why I think maximizing the snaps that they can get now is of value to this team. But we know that they got promise, but what we don't know is do they have a long-term option. That we have confirmed about this quarterback room. When it comes to running back, if he stays healthy, Kendre Miller should be a solid complement to Alvin Kamara. I think his change of pace to Alvin Kamara's ability to kind of be that scat back that can outrun outside, that can catch, that can do all these other things. And then you have a guy like Kendre Miller that can tear you up on the inside, run strong, but also show some finesse. Think could be a really good complement to Alvin Kamara. don't be surprised if the Saints continue to invest in their running back position this offseason, especially because I don't expect Jamal Williams to be back. But I do think that Kendre Miller could be that guy. If he stays healthy for these last 4 games of the season, that's going to be a huge feather in his cap, if you will, or achievement for him in what he can be moving forward. On the offensive line, I think you've learned that you nailed it with Taliese Fuaga. I think you've learned that you've nailed it with the transition from Trevor Penning from the left side, moving him over to the right side. Eric McCoy is obviously your best offensive lineman, but guard play is still a place where you can improve. Now, Cesar Ruiz is under contract for a while. You're not going to be looking at completely overhauling that, but I think left guard, a spot where Lucas Patrick is on an expiring free agent deal, was signed only to 1 year, that's a spot where the Saints could go out and pursue. Either that's a place where you can get veteran help, or a place where you can, look to approach in the draft. I also think they nailed it with John Benton, by the way. The offensive line coach, Rick Dennison, obviously doing a great job there as well, helping with those offensive linemen. So not only have they nailed it with some of their decisions here over the course of this past offseason in terms of personnel, but they've nailed it in terms of the guys that are making those decisions. That, to me, is a key win for the New Orleans Saints. Over on the defensive line, you've got great pressure players all of a sudden in Carl Granderson as well as Chase Young. Chase Young sitting with 61 pressures so far on the season. That's number 4 in the NFL. You have 2 players that are within the top 15 in terms of pressures gained so far this year. Chase Young with 61 sitting within the top 5. Carl Granderson with 48 sitting within the top 15. However, those 2 players are also the 2 players that have the least amount of sacks amongst all defensive players with the least 40 pressures on the season. So while they're sitting with all those pressures, the pressures converting to the sacks have still been an issue. And look, I'm pro pressure. I'm pro the narrative that sacks don't tell the entire story. However, not getting sacks is an issue. There's a big difference between, oh, you'd like to get more, and, oh, you'd like to get them. And I think the Saints are right now too far into the latter part of that conversation on the ends. So while they have good talent there, and Carl Granderson obviously is under contract for a while now, either pursuing the re-signing of Chase Young so that you can garner that pressure, doing that could be a way that they go, but still finding other ways to invest in that defensive interim, I think, is going to be pivotal for this New Orleans Saints team. Cornerback, Alontae Taylor just played his best game as an outside corner in this game up against the Giants, but the team should still continue to evaluate closely he and Kool-Aid McKinstry as a starting tandem. Still young, still some mistakes, all those other things, you know that you're going to deal with that. But are you seeing the building blocks upon which you can transform, build, and make better going into next season? I think that's got to be a big thing that they continue to look at there. And shout out to Ugo Amadi, by the way, who quietly had a fantastic game up against the Giants working out of the slot. At safety, I think the Saints should stick with Will Harris. I think they should re-sign Will Harris. That's an easy one for me. Now, if the defensive scheme changes a ton and all of a sudden Will Harris isn't a fit based upon like the head coach change and all these other things, then I understand that. Like I get that difference. But if that's not the case and Will Harris is still a fit for whatever system the defense is playing in 2025, I think the Saints should bring him back. He's been outstanding for them. By the way, the Saints missed just 1 tackle in run defense last week up against the New York Giants. And Will Harris had a couple of the safest tackles, right? In terms of a guy that was just like, I'm not missing this. He was awesome in that area. Finally, special teams, starting to see a little bit of inconsistency from both kicker and punter. Matthew Hayball got laid into by Darren Rizzi. Now he followed that up. Remember, we always say it's not about what you do wrong, it's about what you do next, right? So he followed that up well, but just keep an eye out on the inconsistencies so far that have started to kind of kind of rear their ugly heads for Matthew Hayball as well as Blake Grupe. Big to watch, especially for Blake Grupe, whose competition is still on the roster in Charlie Smith. So big stuff to watch there. Not saying that these guys should be moved on from before the end of the season or anything crazy like that, but just something to watch as that evaluation continues. Are they able to get back to being more consistent, or do those inconsistencies continue to build, in which case you might have to address those positions again this offseason? So definitely a big one to watch with the specialists. So those are some of the things that I think that we've learned. I left tight end out because I think the tight ends have been playing outstanding over the course of the last 3 games, or really over the course of the last 4 games. So if you want to know what I think about the tight ends, they're awesome. The one thing, though, is losing Taysom Hill has to be a part of that conversation. And we got to see what happens with Taysom Hill, because that's not all that there's a lot of positive outcomes. There's also very realistic negative outcomes when it comes to the future of Taysom Hill. So stuff to watch there. And that might be the thing that you're looking to learn about that tight interim, is what happens with Taysom Hill moving forward. All right, y'all. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to start to turn our eyes towards the Washington Commanders, take a look at their biggest weaknesses, where they're strongest, do a little bit of a statistical comparison, and then get you ready for Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL. Check out Locked On Pelicans as well. Lots of things brewing with Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. Lots to discuss over across at the Smoothie King Center. So make sure you go and check out Jake over at Locked On Pelicans as well. Appreciate you very much, as always, for making this a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.